At dinner, my son-in-law laughed. "You're a loser." I said one sentence that changed everything. At dinner, my son-in-law raised his glass and smirked across the table. "How does it feel to be a loser?" he said, and the laughter stung worse than the wine. They thought I would sit quietly, humiliated in my daughter's home. But I looked him straight in the eye and answered with one sentence that silenced the entire room. What followed turned 15 years of hidden sacrifice into the truth no one could deny. Stay with me, because this story is not just about betrayal, it's about the moment when silence finally breaks. The clinking of silverware against china should have been a pleasant sound that evening, but to me it felt like a drumbeat announcing trouble. We were seated around Anna's long oak table, the one I helped her pick when she moved into the new house, and the candles flickered as if they sensed the storm brewing. My grandchildren sat on either side, their plates piled high with food. Anna had worked hard to make the dinner special. She wanted to celebrate Greg's promotion, and I had even brought along a bottle of wine as a gift. I thought the evening would be one of pride, family, and togetherness. Instead, it became something I will never forget. Greg lifted his glass, swirling the wine with the kind of smugness only success and alcohol could produce. His voice cut through the laughter, sharp and cold. "What's it like to be a loser, Richard?" His words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and suffocating. For a moment no one moved. Then laughter rippled around the table, nervous, forced, as if they were afraid not to laugh. My daughter looked at me with eyes wide, her bracelet sparkling under the candlelight, the one I gave her last Christmas. She opened her mouth as if to stop him, then closed it again. I felt the weight of years pressing on my shoulders, the years of long nights in my study, paying their bills in silence, promising myself that keeping them afloat was worth the sacrifice. Yet here I sat, humiliated at my own daughter's table, called a failure by the man whose life had been carried by my back. I set my fork down carefully. The prime rib was growing cold, untouched. My granddaughter Emma looked up at me, her fork frozen in the air. Her eyes were round with confusion. "Grandpa built me a treehouse last summer," she whispered, as if that simple truth might heal the wound. Greg reached over and patted her head, patronizing and dismissive. "That's sweet, honey, but real men provide for their families." His words sliced deeper than he knew. The silence after that was unbearable. Anna tried to fill it with nervous chatter about Emma's piano recital, but Greg was not finished. He leaned back in the chair at the head of the table, the one he had started claiming as his spot during every family gathering. He spoke loudly about six-figure salaries, about carrying weight, about responsibility, all the while sipping the wine I had bought. Every word was another brick stacked on my chest. I looked at my grandson, Tommy. His young face carried worry far beyond his years. "Are we in trouble, Dad?" he asked, his voice breaking the room in two. Greg answered with a speech about earners and dependents, and as he spoke his eyes locked on mine. He thought my silence meant defeat. He thought he had broken me. Inside, I felt something shift. It was not anger in the usual sense. It was calm, deliberate, the way I felt when I used to design structures meant to last for decades. His words had finally finished a bridge I had been building quietly for 15 years. He asked me directly, "How does it feel to be a failure?" Anna gasped, her glass trembling in her hand. The children's eyes filled with tears. I picked up my water, took a slow sip, and set the glass down with precision. I looked at Greg, at the smirk he wore, the smug certainty that I would sit quietly and take it. My voice was steady, my words simple. "How does it feel to know this failure will no longer be paying your bills?" The air shifted in an instant. His face drained of color as if all the wine had been poured straight from his veins. Anna's hand flew to her mouth. The children sat frozen, their forks suspended. The candles flickered, shadows leaping across the walls like startled ghosts. I did not raise my voice. I did not slam my hand on the table. I simply sat there, calm, precise, and finally free. The table that once symbolized family togetherness became a battlefield, and with one sentence the balance of power shifted. I continued cutting my meat as though nothing had happened. The taste of it barely registered, but each bite was an act of defiance. Around me the silence grew thick, broken only by the scrape of knives and the shallow breathing of those who had just witnessed a lifetime of silence shatter in a single moment. Greg's eyes darted from me to Anna, then to the children. He tried to form words, but nothing came out. He was exposed, not by rage or argument, but by the simple truth spoken in front of everyone he had tried to impress. I smiled, not out of joy, but because I finally understood something. Sometimes revenge is not fire and fury. Sometimes it is a quiet shift, a turning of the table, a reminder that even the most generous heart has limits. And in that moment I saw fear in Greg's eyes for the very first time. The moment I stepped outside that night, the cool March air hit me like a cleansing wave. The laughter and forced chatter from the dining room muffled as the front door closed behind me, but the echo of Greg's words clung to me like smoke. I walked slowly to my car, slipped into the driver's seat, and let my hands rest on the wheel for a long moment before turning the key. The engine hummed quietly. My headlights cut through the darkness of their neatly kept suburban street, illuminating trimmed hedges and polished cars parked in driveways. It was a neighborhood built on the appearance of success. I drove without the radio. The silence filled the cabin, broken only by the steady sound of the tires against the asphalt. My hands felt steady on the wheel, but inside a storm churned. For 15 years I had carried them, hidden the truth in filing cabinets, and never once asked for thanks. The thought repeated in my head, not with bitterness but with clarity. Nearly $1 million had flowed through my veins into their lives, and tonight it ended with one sentence at a dinner table. As I passed houses glowing with porch lights, I thought of the home I returned to each night. Not as grand as Anna's, not filled with new furniture or granite countertops, but solid and mine. I thought of the oak desk in my study, the brass lamp, the smell of old paper and polished wood. That was where my life's work had gathered, hidden in neat folders and drawers, waiting for the day I would need them. I knew tonight was that day. The traffic lights were mostly green, as if the road itself wanted me to keep moving, to go straight into the heart of what I had avoided for too long. I could feel Linda's presence beside me in the passenger seat. I heard her voice from those final nights, frail yet steady, asking me to look after our daughter. I whispered aloud into the quiet, "I have, Linda. I have, more than you ever asked." My words vanished into the hum of the road, but I felt her listening. At one red light I looked over at a bakery that was closed for the night. In the window sat a rack of unbought bread. Something about it made me ache. All these years I had sacrificed little joys, skipped vacations, ignored the possibility of companionship, so that Anna's family could live in a way they never earned. And for what? To be called a failure by the man whose BMW I had kept from repossession more than once. The light turned green. I pressed the gas slowly. The quiet rhythm of the road began to calm me. With each mile I felt less like a man defeated, and more like a man finally stepping into his own truth. My home appeared after the last bend, modest and warmly lit by the motion sensor lamp above the garage. As I pulled into the driveway, long shadows stretched across the steps, reminding me of how different my life looked compared to theirs. Simple, steady, honest. Inside, the air smelled familiar, safe. I hung my coat in the hall closet and paused, listening to the silence. It was not the heavy silence of humiliation. It was the silence of freedom. I walked down the hall to my study and opened the door. The brass lamp clicked on, casting its warm glow over the mahogany desk. The drawers waited for me, labeled in my careful handwriting. I ran my hand across the surface of the desk. Every mark in the wood told a story. Every folder inside those drawers held the proof of my sacrifices. Tonight was not about anger. Tonight was about finally seeing clearly what I had given and what it had cost. I sat in the leather chair Linda had helped me pick years ago, leaned back and closed my eyes. The images came to me one after another. Anna crying on my shoulder after Linda's funeral, begging me for help with the mortgage. Greg shaking my hand, promising it was only temporary. The children's voices calling me Grandpa, never knowing that nearly every toy, every lesson, every trip had been paid for by me. And now the memory of Greg's smirk at the dinner table, asking me how it felt to be a loser. I opened my eyes and pulled the first drawer toward me. The files sat in perfect order: blue for mortgage, green for cars, yellow for school, red for medical. Each one a piece of the life they lived, and I financed. My fingers trembled only for a moment before steadying. It was time to face the numbers, to see exactly what my silence had built. As the clock ticked on the wall, and the night deepened outside, I understood something. Tonight was not the end of me. Tonight was the beginning. A man can only carry so much before his back breaks, but if he lays down the weight himself, he stands taller than ever before. I looked at the empty chair across the desk where Linda used to sit, and for the first time in years I felt her smile. I leaned back in my chair and let the soft glow of the lamp rest on the edges of those files. The paper smelled faintly of time and ink, and for a moment I was carried backward, not just to the numbers, but to the moments that gave them life. The past was not locked away in these drawers. It lived in me, and as I looked at the folders, it all came rushing back. I remembered the night Linda and I sat in this very room, her hands thin and frail from the illness that was stealing her away. Her voice was tired, but her eyes held me with the same strength they had the day we married. "Promise me you'll look after Anna," she whispered. She was scared for our daughter, not for herself. I had held her hand and said yes. That promise had carried me through the darkest months after she passed. At her funeral, when Anna collapsed into my arms, her voice breaking with panic about the mortgage and bills, I thought only of the vow I had made. Back then, the gratitude had been overwhelming. Greg shook my hand, his eyes wet, promising it was just until he found his footing. Anna called me every week with tears of thanks. She brought the children by for Sunday dinners. Emma was barely walking, and Tommy would run through my yard chasing fireflies while I grilled burgers. Those visits felt like healing for all of us. When I wrote those first checks, I told myself it was love in action, and in truth, it was. I remembered the first mortgage payment I made for them. It was February, snow on the ground, the house cold because their furnace had broken. I gave Anna the money, and a few days later she called, crying with relief. "Dad, you saved us." Greg left a thank you note in my mailbox, written in his careful handwriting. He even came over that weekend to shovel my driveway. I kept that note for years, tucked between old letters from Linda. But then things began to change, slowly, almost too slowly to notice. The thank you notes stopped coming. The Sunday visits became less frequent, replaced by hurried calls asking if I could cover one more thing. Just until next month, they said. Just until the promotion. Just until they got back on their feet. Each just until became another folder in my cabinet, another piece of my retirement given away without complaint. I thought of the car loan, Anna's SUV and Greg's first BMW lease. He stood in my driveway one afternoon, beaming with pride, showing me the leather interior. He thanked me with words, but I noticed he never told his friends who had co-signed. At a neighborhood barbecue later, I listened as he bragged about his smart financial planning. My name was never mentioned. I swallowed it then, telling myself it was enough to know the truth. The years rolled forward. Tuition bills came, medical emergencies, vacations that seemed extravagant to me but apparently essential to them. Each time I told myself this was family, this was duty, this was the promise I made to Linda. But somewhere along the way, gratitude turned into expectation. Anna's calls changed from "Dad, can you help us?" to "Dad, you need to?" Greg stopped looking me in the eye when he asked. Sometimes he did not ask at all, he simply let Anna do it. I remembered one Christmas when I gave the children new bicycles, bought with my own money. They were thrilled, riding up and down the driveway. That same night, Greg raised a glass to his own hard work and how it had made such a Christmas possible. Anna smiled and agreed. I sat quietly, the toast echoing in my ears, and realized they had convinced themselves the gifts came from him. I felt like a ghost at my own table. The past weighed heavy on me as I thought of all the dreams I had set aside. The lake house Linda and I had planned to buy, the trips we wanted to take, the hobbies I wanted to explore once I retired. All postponed. All sacrificed so Anna and Greg could live a life they had not earned. I gave them stability, but in the process I stripped it from myself. I closed my eyes and saw Linda again. She would not have wanted this. She wanted me to help Anna stand on her own, not to carry her like a child for the rest of her life. Somewhere along the years I had confused enabling with love. That mistake had grown roots in my home, spreading through every folder and every canceled check. As I opened my eyes and looked back at the files, I realized the reckoning was not only for them, it was for me too. I had to face that my silence had allowed this entitlement to grow. I had to accept that love without boundaries becomes something twisted, something that poisons instead of heals. The past was written in numbers and receipts, but it was also written in tears, in promises broken, in words never spoken. And as I sat there with the weight of it pressing down, I understood that the only way forward was through truth. Not just the truth I carried in these drawers, but the truth I needed to finally speak out loud. The drawer slid open with a soft scrape, and the neat rows of folders stared back at me like silent witnesses. Each color told its own story. Blue for mortgage, green for cars, yellow for schools, red for medical. I had created the system years ago so I could keep track of everything, but I had never stopped long enough to look at it all as a whole. Tonight I would. I pulled out the first blue folder and set it on the desk. Inside were hundreds of statements, each one marked with the bank stamp. $2,800, month after month, year after year. I traced the numbers with my finger. The first payment had been in 2009, the month after Linda's funeral, when Anna told me she and Greg might lose the house. I remembered her voice on the phone, shaking with panic. I had written the check without hesitation, and then another the next month, and another, 15 years of them, stacked so high that my desk almost groaned under the weight. The calculator blinked its answer back at me. $504,000. $500,000 poured into a house that had never been mine. The green folder came next. Auto loans, leases, insurance premiums. Greg's BMW, renewed every few years, gleaming in their driveway while I drove my old truck to the hardware store. Anna's SUV, traded up twice, always with the newest features for the children's comfort. I added the figures carefully. $115,000 for car payments, not including the insurance. I thought of the times Greg pulled up to family gatherings, revving the engine, grinning as neighbors admired the car. He never once admitted that his father-in-law had signed the checks that kept the wheels turning. I reached for the yellow folders, and my heart sank before I even opened them. Tuition bills, one after another. Private academies with glossy brochures, photos of swimming pools and international programs. Every semester I wrote the checks. $24,000 a year, sometimes more. Emma's piano lessons, Tommy's baseball league fees, the summer camps with horseback riding and foreign trips. I stacked the papers in neat piles, and the numbers added themselves into $192,000. I could see the children's smiles in my memory, and that softened the ache a little. They were innocent in all of this. They had no idea their grandfather's quiet sacrifices were the reason they could stand in uniforms that cost more than I once earned in a month. The red folder was heavy. Medical bills, co-payments, dental work, therapy sessions. $8,000 a year, 15 years. $120,000. I remembered the nights Anna called me in tears when Greg lost his job and they had no insurance. I covered the premiums. I covered the emergencies. I covered the braces, the broken arm, the hospital stays. I had carried their safety net on my shoulders, while my own health took a back seat. Behind those 4 main folders, I found receipts tucked into envelopes, small things that added up to more than I had realized. Vacations to Disney World and Aspen, cruises to Europe, kitchen renovations, down payments on things they wanted but never planned for, $45,000, in what I had labeled miscellaneous. I looked at the total written in my notebook and felt the air leave my lungs. $976,200. Nearly $1 million. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the figure. I thought of the modest two-bedroom house I lived in, the lakefront property Linda and I once dreamed of but never bought, the trips we had planned and never taken. I thought of the brochures for Italy and Scotland that still sat in my desk drawer, yellowed at the edges from waiting too long. I thought of the woman from church who once asked me to dinner, and how I had turned her down because I needed to send another check to Anna. The cost was not only in dollars, it was in years of my life, in choices I never made for myself, in dreams folded away like unused maps. I had built bridges and towers during my career, structures meant to last lifetimes. Yet the most expensive structure I ever built was invisible. It was the life my daughter and her husband lived, financed by me while they pretended it was their own achievement. I closed the folders one by one, stacking them carefully, my hands steady though my heart ached. I saw Linda's face in my mind, her smile that used to light up this study. I had kept my promise to her, but in doing so I had nearly lost myself. Tonight the numbers told me what my heart had avoided for years. I could not carry them any longer. The lamp cast a warm glow across the papers, but the shadows seemed sharper now. I looked at the total once more and whispered it out loud. 976,200. The sound of it filled the room like a confession. I set the calculator down, folded my hands on the desk, and for the first time in 15 years allowed myself to feel the weight of everything I had given away. Morning light spilled across my kitchen table as I sat with a notebook and a pen, the coffee cooling beside me. The figures from the night before were still etched in my mind, each dollar a memory, each total a piece of myself given away. I opened the notebook to a clean page and wrote one word across the top in large letters: cancellations. Beneath it I listed every automatic payment, every draft, every quiet rescue I had signed up for. Mortgage, insurance, car leases, tuition, utilities, medical premiums. My hand was steady as I wrote, as if it had been waiting years for this task. The first call was to the bank. My voice sounded calm even as my heart beat heavier. The representative was polite, her tone brisk, asking for account numbers and verification. I gave each answer as if I were reading from an engineer's blueprint, step by step, precise. She confirmed the cancellation of the automatic transfer. For 15 years that line had drained my account each month like clockwork, and with a few keystrokes it was gone. A part of me expected to feel fear. Instead, I felt lighter. Next was the insurance company. A supervisor came on the line, her voice practiced with concern. She asked if I was sure, if I understood the consequences of discontinuing coverage. I told her I understood perfectly. My notes filled with confirmation numbers, each one written in the careful script of a man dismantling a system he had built with his own hands. The car lease company transferred me 3 times before I reached someone who could help. I pictured Greg behind the wheel of his BMW, boasting to neighbors about his success, never once mentioning me. The voice on the phone read me the terms of termination. I said yes to every clause, every penalty, every line of fine print. When she finally said, "Your account has been closed," I thanked her and added another check mark in my notebook. The tuition office was efficient, almost too efficient. They did not ask why, only when the payments would stop. I gave the date, immediate. The silence on the other end was colder than I expected. I knew soon that silence would carry to Anna, to Greg, to the children. It would come in the form of phone calls, letters, and notices, but I did not waver. Each call was like removing a weight from my shoulders. 8 calls in total that morning, each one recorded with date, time, and confirmation number. My engineering mind had built bridges, towers, and tunnels. Now it built a record of freedom. Between calls, I looked around my kitchen. The clock ticked on the wall. Sparrows fought over crumbs outside the window. Life moved on, indifferent to my decisions. I realized that was the truth I had ignored for years. The world does not stop because one man sacrifices himself. It goes on, whether he gives or not. By late morning, the list was nearly complete. My hand ached from writing, but my spirit felt strong. The silence in my house was no longer heavy. It was clean, like fresh air after a storm. I looked at the final items on the list: smaller payments, utilities, subscriptions tied to their home. I called each company, gave each number, waded through each recorded menu. By noon, my notebook held a series of neat lines, each one proof that the structure I had built for 15 years had been dismantled in less than 4 hours. The phone sat quiet for a while, as if holding its breath. I knew it would ring again soon, and when it did, it would not be friendly voices. It would be confusion, panic, anger. But I was ready. I closed the notebook and set it on the counter. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and stood at the window, watching the sparrows scatter and return. It struck me then how much of my life I had lived in the background, invisible even in my own family's story. I had been the quiet architect of their lives, building them comfort while living with restraint. With each cancellation, I was not destroying anything. I was simply ending the illusion. The afternoon stretched before me, quiet and steady. I placed the notebook back on my desk beside the folders. For the first time in years, I felt like a man reclaiming his own life. The foundations I had propped up were no longer mine to hold. The phone would ring soon, and when it did, I would answer. But the weight would not return to my shoulders. It never would again. The first call came before I had even finished my coffee. The shrill ring echoed through the house, and I knew before I answered who it would be. Anna's voice rushed through the line, high and nervous. "Dad, something strange happened with the mortgage. The bank called. They said the payment didn't go through." Her words tumbled over one another, the fear already creeping in. I could hear her trying to steady her breathing. I kept my tone even. "That's correct. It didn't go through because I canceled it." There was silence on her end, then a sharp intake of breath. "You what? You can't just do that. The mortgage is due. We'll be penalized." Her voice cracked the way it used to when she was a teenager caught in a lie. I let the silence stretch until it made her uncomfortable. Finally, I said, "I told Greg last night. I'm not paying your bills anymore." She started to protest, then stopped. I could hear muffled voices in the background, the sound of Greg asking what I had said. Then his voice filled the line, louder, harsher. "Mark, whatever game you think you're playing needs to end right now. You can't just walk away from 15 years of responsibility." His words came fast, angry, but beneath the bravado I caught the edge of fear. "It isn't a game," I said. "It's simply the end of my support." "You'll ruin us," he snapped. "The mortgage, the insurance, the cars, the kids' school. We can't cover all of that." "That's the point," I replied. "You can't because you've been living beyond your means." For the first time since I had known him, Greg was silent. Only the sound of his breathing came through the receiver. Then Anna's voice returned, trembling. "Dad, please. The kids will suffer. What are we supposed to tell them?" I closed my eyes and pictured Tommy and Emma, their innocent faces. They did not deserve the storm that was about to break over their heads, but they also did not deserve to grow up thinking entitlement was normal. "Tell them the truth," I said. "Tell them their grandfather has already given nearly $1 million, and now it's time for their parents to take responsibility." Anna gasped softly, as though the number itself had cut her. "$1 million?" Her voice fell to a whisper. "That can't be right." "It is," I answered, "and I have the records to prove it." Greg came back on the line, his tone lower now, controlled but strained. "You'll regret this, Mark. Families don't abandon each other. People will talk." "Do you really want to be the man who destroyed his daughter's family?" I almost laughed at the irony. For 15 years I had sacrificed everything to keep their family afloat, and they had the nerve to call me the destroyer. My voice stayed calm. "I'm not destroying anything. I'm just refusing to carry what you should have been carrying all along." The line went quiet again. Then I heard Anna crying softly in the background. Greg muttered something about calling a lawyer. The call ended abruptly. leaving the house in heavy silence. I set the phone down and walked to the window. Outside, children from the neighborhood rode bicycles up and down the street. Their laughter carried on the cool breeze. For a moment I thought of Tommy and Emma, how their world would soon feel less secure. The thought twisted my chest, but I knew this was the only way. Better they learn the truth now than live in a house of cards forever. Not long after, the phone rang again. Anna's voice was thinner this time, frayed with panic. "Dad, the insurance company just called. They said the policy has been canceled. Tommy has a dental appointment next week. What are we supposed to do?" "You're supposed to pay for it yourselves," I said gently. She was quiet for a long moment. I could hear the children in the background, their voices rising with questions. "Are we in trouble, Mom? Why are you crying?" My heart ached, but I forced myself to stay firm. "You'll figure it out, Anna. You have to." Her sobs grew louder. "Please, Dad. Just until we get through this month, please." The word felt heavy, final, but also freeing. When the call ended, I sat at my desk and opened my notebook again. The confirmation numbers looked neat and certain in the lamplight. Each one was a marker of change, each one a promise to myself that I would not go back. The panic on the other end of the line was only the first wave. More would come, but I knew something they didn't yet understand. Panic can be a teacher, and sometimes it is the only one strong enough to break denial. The house was quiet again, but the silence no longer felt heavy. It felt like a boundary finally drawn. And for the first time in 15 years, I was not afraid of their fear. It was late the next afternoon when I heard the sound of tires screeching in front of my house. I looked out the window and saw Greg's BMW parked crooked in the driveway, its headlights still on, the engine growling as if it shared his temper. Anna was beside him, her face pale, clutching her purse against her chest like a shield. They marched up the walkway together, Greg with the stride of a man preparing for war, Anna with steps hesitant but determined to follow. Before they could knock, I opened the door. "Come in," I said evenly, stepping aside. They brushed past me without a word, Greg heading straight into my living room as though he owned it. He stood in the center of the rug, his arms crossed, his jaw tight, eyes flashing with anger. Anna lingered by the doorway, her hands trembling. "This ridiculous tantrum ends now," Greg barked. His voice echoed off the walls of the quiet house. "You're going to pick up the phone, call every one of those banks, and restore the payments. All of them. Today?" "No," I answered simply. His face flushed crimson. "You can't just cut us off without warning. There are obligations, there are contracts." "Show me the contract where I agreed to pay your bills forever," I replied. My voice was calm, steady, the same tone I once used presenting designs to city officials. Anna stepped forward then, her eyes shiny with tears. "Dad, please. Think about what Mom would have wanted. You promised her at the hospital. You promised you'd take care of me." The mention of Linda's name struck deep, like cold air through an open wound. I had expected it, but it still hurt. I took a breath. "I promised to help you get stable," I said. "That was 15 years ago. Nearly $1 million ago. You are less stable now than when I began." Her mouth opened in shock. "$1 million?" She whispered it like the number itself was too heavy to hold. $976,200, I said, walking calmly to my desk. I pulled out the notebook and laid it open on the table. Mortgage assistance, car payments, tuition, insurance, vacations, medical bills. Should I break it down by category? Greg's bluster faltered for a flicker of a moment. His eyes darted over the neat rows of figures, then back to me. "That's impossible. We never asked for that much." "You never asked for anything," I corrected. "You simply expected it." Anna sank onto the couch, her face drained of color. Her tears spilled freely now. "But the children," she whispered. "Tommy's baseball, Emma's dance lessons. They'll suffer." "They won't," I answered. "I'll pay their expenses directly from now on. School, clothes, medical care, activities. They will never go without. But nothing will pass through you and Greg again." Greg snapped back to life, pacing my carpet like a caged animal. You can't divide the family like that. We're a unit. You're undermining me in front of my own children. Teams require mutual respect, I said firmly. When was the last time either of you thanked me for anything? The question landed in the room like a stone thrown into still water. Neither of them spoke. The silence stretched until it was unbearable. Anna covered her face with her hands, her sobs breaking the quiet. Greg stopped pacing, his shoulders stiff, his hands clenched. Fine, he spat finally. You want gratitude? Thank you. There. Are you satisfied? Now fix the payments. Gratitude doesn't work retroactively, Greg, I said. It isn't a performance you deliver once you're cornered. For the first time since stepping into my house, his anger shifted into something else. His voice lost its edge and carried a hint of fear. What exactly do you want from us? I want you to live within your means, I said. I want my grandchildren to see their parents working for what they have, not waiting for handouts. And I want to be treated like a father and a grandfather, not an ATM. Anna lifted her tear-stained face. What if we can't? What if we lose everything? Then you'll learn what failure actually feels like, I said quietly. The words settled heavy in the air. For a moment, none of us moved. Greg straightened his shoulders as though summoning his last shred of dignity. His voice trembled as he spoke. We'll see about this. There are lawyers who specialize in elder financial abuse. I almost smiled. Please call them. I'd love to explain how I've been financially abused for 15 years. He had no answer. He grabbed his keys from the table and stormed toward the door. Anna followed slowly, her head bowed, her shoulders shaking with sobs. The BMW roared to life, tires squealing as they sped away down the street. I stood by the window watching until the red taillights disappeared. My hands were shaking, though my face was calm. The house filled with silence, not the silence of defeat, but of release. I sank into my old leather chair, the one Linda gave me on our 20th anniversary, and stared at the photo of our wedding on the mantel. She smiled at me from that frame, and I whispered into the empty room, I kept my promise, Linda, but it's time for them to carry their own weight. It did not take long for the whispers to begin. By the end of the week, I could feel them circling around me like wind curling through narrow streets. My phone rang less with family voices and more with questions that carried the edge of rumor. It started at Murphy's, the local bar where Greg liked to boast. My friend Dave called me one evening, his tone careful. Mark, I heard your son-in-law holding court. He was telling anyone who would listen that you cut them off without warning, that you're forcing the kids out of school, out of their home. He made it sound like cruelty. I thanked Dave for telling me, though inside I felt the burn of betrayal. It did not surprise me. I knew Greg would spin his story, frame himself as the victim. What did surprise me was how quickly people believed it. At the grocery store 2 days later, Nancy Morrison cornered me in the produce aisle. Mark Bennett, she said, her voice carrying farther than she realized. I am ashamed of you, cutting off your daughter when she needs you most. What would Linda think? Shoppers nearby turned their heads, curiosity lighting their eyes. I stood there with an apple in my hand and looked Nancy in the eye. Linda would think 15 years and nearly $1 million was generous enough. The words stopped her cold. $1 million? She repeated, her face paling. 976,200, I answered. Mortgage, cars, tuition, insurance, medical bills, vacations. Would you like to see the bank records? The aisle grew very quiet. Nancy's indignation faltered, and she muttered something before walking away. I placed the apple back in the bin and carried on. But gossip has a way of spreading faster than truth. At church the following Sunday I felt eyes on me, lingering, measuring. After the service, Linda's sister Janet approached with disapproval sharp in her tone. Caroline says you've abandoned them, she whispered. The children are confused. They think their grandfather doesn't love them anymore. I met her gaze and asked, did Caroline mention the nearly $1 million I've given her family since Linda passed? Janet's mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked shaken, as though a veil had been pulled from her eyes. Even Emma was dragged into it. One afternoon the phone rang and her small rehearsed voice came through. "Grandpa, Mommy says we might lose our house because you don't want to help anymore. Did we do something wrong?" My heart twisted. "No, sweetheart," I said gently. "You didn't do anything wrong. Would you like me to take you out for ice cream this week?" Her giggle came through the line, light and unburdened. "Yes, Grandpa. Mommy said you might say no to everything now." "I never say no to ice cream," I told her. That ice cream trip brought me more peace than any adult conversation. Emma's smile was real, her stories about school and art projects unclouded by pride or lies. When I dropped her back at the house, Anna watched from the window, her expression unreadable, her eyes calculating. I drove away with the taste of vanilla still on my tongue, and the certainty that truth would find its way through, no matter how much Greg tried to cover it. The whispers grew louder when bills started failing. Foreclosure notices were seen on their door. The BMW disappeared from the driveway, replaced by a tired Honda. Neighbors noticed. Dave called again. "Mark, folks at the bar are starting to put pieces together. Bill Henderson remembered you co-signed that BMW lease, and when Greg bragged about his success, Bill called him out in front of everyone. Said he wondered how Greg could afford a $60,000 car on his salary." The room went quiet real quick after that. Each time someone came to me with accusations, I answered with calm truth. Not anger, not excuses, just the numbers, the years, the sacrifices. Some walked away embarrassed, others simply quiet, but all of them left with less certainty than before. Slowly the tide began to turn. People who once shook their heads at me began to nod with understanding. They saw the picture more clearly. Still, the sting of gossip remained. It hurt to hear my name spoken with judgment, to watch neighbors I had known for decades choose sides. It hurt more to know that my daughter was the one feeding the fire. But hurt is not the same as regret. Each whisper was proof that the old system was gone. My silence had allowed them to build a false image, and now my words were tearing it down. As I sat on my porch one evening, the sun setting over the quiet street, I thought about the cost of truth. It is never cheap. It demands pride, demands comfort, demands reputation. But it also cleans. It strips away illusions until only what is solid remains. I sipped my coffee and listened to the faint voices of children playing down the block. The community could whisper as much as it wanted. I had lived long enough to know whispers fade. But truth, once spoken, has a way of staying. The cracks began to show sooner than I expected. At first they were faint, a raised voice through the thin walls of their house, a slammed door carried across the street in the quiet of evening. Then the arguments grew louder, sharp enough that neighbors mentioned them in passing, their faces uncomfortable as they tried to avoid saying too much. I walked by one morning and heard them before I even reached the mailbox. Greg's voice was cutting. Anna's was breaking, the words carried out through an open window. "You should have made him fix it," Greg shouted. "You're his daughter. He would have listened to you." "I did try," Anna cried back. "You think I wanted this?" He said no, Greg. Number. For the first time in my life, he said no. Their voices collided like two storms meeting in the same sky. I walked slowly back inside, set the mail on the counter, and sat in my chair. I had always known their marriage leaned on my support, but I had not realized how fragile it truly was without it. The foreclosure notice nailed to their front door was another crack, this one visible to the whole neighborhood. I saw Anna standing in the yard staring at it with tears running down her face while Greg yanked it off angrily and crumpled it in his hand. That evening Dave mentioned it casually, his tone heavy with concern. "People are starting to wonder how deep the trouble goes," he told me. I only nodded. I knew how deep. The BMW was repossessed the following week. I heard the tow truck before I saw it. The grinding sound of chains, the shouts of the workers, the hum of the winch pulling the car away. Greg came out in his suit, his face red with rage, demanding they stop, waving his arms like he could will the car back into his possession. But the men did not listen. They had their orders, and within minutes the driveway was empty, except for the oil stain where the car had Saturday. Anna stood on the porch, her arms crossed tight around her body, her face pale. That night their Honda appeared in the driveway, an older model with scratches on the bumper. It was the first honest car they had owned in years. Inside their home the fights deepened. I knew because Tommy called me one evening, his voice low, almost whispering. Grandpa, Mom, and Dad are yelling again. About money. About you. He hesitated, then added softly, I don't like it here when they fight. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay gentle. I know, buddy, I know. I wanted to tell him it would get better, but I could not promise what I did not know. The school called Anna about tuition arrears, and that conversation bled into another argument. I heard from a neighbor that Greg accused her of wasting time working at the grocery store when she could be home managing the family. Anna snapped back that at least she was trying. At least she was earning something. Their words carried out into the street. People stopped walking their dogs just to listen. The final crack I witnessed was one evening when I walked past their house on my way to the store. The windows were open, and their voices spilled into the dusk. 8 hours on my feet for peanuts, Anna shouted. You never appreciated what we had. 15 years of handouts, Greg yelled back, and now it's gone. Then came the sound of something breaking, maybe a plate thrown against the wall, maybe just the fragile illusion of control shattering in front of their children. I heard a door slam, and then the quiet rumble of the Honda starting up. Anna's sobs drifted into the night air, raw and heavy. I stopped at the corner and stood still. For years I had carried the weight of their lives, believing it made them stronger, believing it honored Linda's wish. But in truth, it had only propped up a marriage built on borrowed stability. Now that the crutches were gone, they were stumbling, and the whole world could see it. Back home, I sat in my study, the lamplight soft against the papers that still covered my desk. I thought of Anna's face when she realized the money was gone. I thought of Greg's fury when he watched the BMW hauled away. I thought of my grandchildren listening to every argument, learning lessons neither parent intended to teach. Cracks in a marriage can be repaired if both want it badly enough. But these cracks were not just from pride or anger. They were the result of years of dependency, years of entitlement, years of ignoring the truth. Without the cushion of my support, the sharp edges of their reality cut straight through the walls of their home. And I knew those edges would either destroy them or finally force them to change. I first saw Anna in her new uniform on a Wednesday afternoon. I had stopped by the grocery store to pick up coffee and bread, nothing more, but as I pushed my cart through the automatic doors, there she was, standing behind a register in a blue vest with a name tag clipped to her chest. Her hair was pulled back, her makeup smudged, her eyes tired in a way I had never seen before. She scanned items with the mechanical rhythm of someone who had been doing it for hours, her smile forced and fragile. For a moment she did not see me. I watched her bag a woman's groceries, nod politely to the chatter, and then call for the next customer. When she finally looked up and her eyes landed on me, a flicker of shame crossed her face. She straightened her back as if to compose herself, but her cheeks flushed red. "Dad," she said quietly, her voice trembling, "I did not want you to see me like this." I stepped closer, my cart forgotten. "I see you working," I said gently. "There's nothing to be ashamed of in that." She shook her head, blinking hard as if fighting back tears. "You don't understand. Yesterday Mrs. Henderson came through my line. She asked why I was here. I wanted to crawl under the counter. I used to see those people at the country club. Now I'm scanning their groceries." I looked at her carefully. "And did you crawl under the counter?" "No," she whispered. I smiled and asked paper or plastic. That answer struck me deeper than she knew. For the first time in years, Anna had faced humiliation and chosen to stand anyway. It was the smallest step, but it was hers. I placed my items on the belt, and she scanned them silently, her hands shaking. I paid without a word, and when she handed me the bag, I saw her eyes glisten with something beyond shame. It was humility. Later that evening, I sat in my study thinking about her. For 15 years, she had lived in a bubble where bills disappeared before they reached her, where cars appeared in the driveway, where schools accepted tuition without question. Now she stood on her feet for 8 hours, earning a wage barely enough to cover groceries. I pictured her pulling that vest over her head in the morning, driving the old Honda to work, clocking in and out like every other tired employee. It was not the life she was used to, but it was the life she had earned. The neighbors noticed too. Dave mentioned he had seen her working the checkout. He said some people whispered, some shook their heads, but others nodded with respect. At least she's trying, he told me. She's doing what needs to be done. I nodded in agreement, though inside I felt a quiet pride. For the first time in years, Anna was not asking me to carry her. She was carrying herself. The next week I stopped by again, this time intentionally. I bought milk and eggs just to walk through her line. She looked tired, her shoulders slumped, but when she saw me, she forced a smile. "Dad, you don't need to come here." I shrugged. "Everyone needs milk." She scanned the items, and when she handed me the receipt, her hand lingered a second longer. "Thank you," she whispered, though I knew she was not thanking me for the groceries. At home I sat with her words echoing in my mind. Thank you. 2 words I had not heard from her in years, and they had returned not because I gave her money, but because she was beginning to see what effort meant. That night, as I watered the garden, I saw her walking up the street after her shift. The Honda was parked at the curb, but she had chosen to walk the last block. Her steps were slow, her back bent with fatigue. She carried a grocery bag of discounted items, her vest still wrinkled from the long day. When she saw me, she raised her hand in a small wave, her eyes tired but sincere. I waved back, my chest tight with conflicting emotions. I hated to see her so worn down, but I knew this was the path she needed. Humility was breaking through the shell entitlement had built around her. Work was teaching her what my money never could. In the stillness of that evening, I thought of Linda. She would have wanted this. Not the suffering, not the hardship, but the growth. She would have wanted Anna to stand, to fight, to learn that dignity comes not from what is given, but from what is earned. For the first time since Linda's funeral, I felt that promise moving in the right direction. My support had carried Anna too long. Now her own 2 feet were beginning to take the weight. It was a Thursday evening when the phone rang, and Tommy's voice came through, soft and uncertain. "Grandpa, Mom and Dad are fighting again. They said mean things about you." My chest tightened at his words. "What kind of mean things, buddy?" I asked. "That you ruined everything on purpose," he whispered. Then Mom started crying and said maybe they ruined it themselves. I closed my eyes and let the silence sit for a moment. Tommy was only 12, but he was old enough to hear more than he should, and young enough to still believe every word carried weight. I told him gently, "You didn't do anything wrong. None of this is your fault." He sighed, and I could hear the weight in his breath. "I know, Grandpa, but it feels like everything's breaking." A few days later, Emma came to see me after school. She walked into my kitchen, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, her small hands gripping a folded piece of paper. "Grandpa, I made something for you," she said with shy pride. She unfolded the paper to reveal a drawing of a treehouse, carefully colored with crayon, and underneath it she had written, "Thank you, Grandpa, for building my favorite place." My throat tightened. She smiled up at me, her front tooth missing, her innocence shining in her eyes. Nobody had told her to write those words. They had come from her own heart. We sat at the kitchen table with milk and cookies, and she told me about school, about her art project, about the nightmares she sometimes had now. She said she dreamed of moving to a strange house where she did not know anyone. I pulled her close and told her she would always have a place with me. She nodded, satisfied with that promise, and then went back to her cookie as if the world had already been set right. Children see things adults try to hide. They do not understand mortgages or repossessions, but they feel the tension like changes in the weather. Tommy asked me once, "Grandpa, are we poor now?" I told him, "No, buddy, you're not poor. You just have to learn how to live within what your family earns." He frowned as if trying to make sense of the math, then said softly, "Maybe Dad shouldn't have bought that big car." His honesty struck me like a bell. Out of the mouths of children comes truth no adult wants to admit. One evening, as I walked them back to their house, Tommy stopped me on the sidewalk. "Grandpa, why don't Mom and Dad say thank you? You do so much." I crouched down to meet his eyes. "Sometimes people forget," I said. "Sometimes they get so used to help they stop seeing it as help." He nodded slowly, like he was filing the thought away in his young mind. Then he asked the question that nearly broke me. "Will you stop loving us too?" I pulled him into a hug and held him tight. "Never. I will never stop loving you." Emma's innocence showed in smaller ways. She still ran into my arms when she saw me, still believed ice cream could fix anything. Once, while coloring at my table, she said quietly, "Grandpa, maybe if we said thank you more, everything would be better." Her crayons scratched against the paper as she filled the page with bright colors. She looked at me with those clear eyes that carried no pride, no resentment, only truth. I kissed the top of her head and whispered, "You're wiser than you know." I began to realize that while Greg and Anna were unraveling under the weight of their pride, the children were learning lessons neither of them had intended. They were watching entitlement crumble and gratitude rise in its place. They were learning that love does not come from cars or vacations or big houses. It comes from presence, from effort, from simple thank yous whispered over milk and cookies. One Sunday afternoon, Tommy handed me a folded piece of lined paper. On it, he had written in uneven handwriting, "Thank you, Grandpa, for helping us. I promise when I grow up I will work hard like you." I read it twice, then folded it back carefully. My eyes burned, and I had to clear my throat before I could speak. I told him I believed him, and I did. The innocence of children has a way of cutting through the noise. Where adults create layers of pride and excuses, children see what is in front of them. They saw a grandfather who had always been there. They saw parents who were struggling because they had relied too much on something they never earned. And in their small voices, in their drawings and their letters, I heard the truth I had been waiting for. The next generation would understand what the last had forgotten. The notice came with bold letters across the top, 30 days until foreclosure. I knew it would come, and yet holding the paper in my hand made the reality sharper. $8,625, due before the month closed. The figure was precise, cold, and unyielding. I set it on my desk beside the neat piles of records and watched the evening light fade across the paper. The countdown had begun. I could hear their house from mine in the nights that followed. The walls carried their voices when the arguments swelled. Anna's cries, Greg's anger, the doors slamming, the muffled sobs of children caught in the middle. I sat by my window sometimes, listening, not out of curiosity, but because the noise was impossible to ignore. Each word was another crack in their facade. Each shout a reminder of what happens when truth is forced into the open. Anna came by 2 days later, her eyes swollen from crying. She stood on my porch with a folded paper in her hand. "Dad, we have 28 days. Please, you have to help us." I stepped aside and let her in, but I did not reach for the paper. We sat in the living room, the air heavy with her desperation. She pleaded, her voice breaking as she spoke of the children, their friends at school, the possibility of losing their home. I listened in silence, then told her softly, "I already told you where I stand. I will protect my grandchildren. I will not protect the life you and Greg built on false ground." Her tears fell onto her lap, and she whispered, "Then what will we do?" "You will do what every family must do," I said. "You will decide what matters and what does not. You will choose humility or pride." The answer is not mine to give anymore. Greg came later that week, his confidence cracked but not broken. He stood in my living room with the notice in his hand, waving it like a weapon. "You're condemning us, Mark. We can't come up with that money. You've backed us into a corner." His voice was sharp, but behind it I heard the tremor of fear. I told him calmly, "I did not back you anywhere. You walked there on your own." He clenched his fists, then let the paper fall to the floor. His silence was louder than his threats. Each day the number ticked lower. 20 days, then 18. The children felt it too. Tommy called me one evening, his voice small. "Grandpa, Mom says we might have to move." Emma had a nightmare last night. She thought we'd be sleeping in the car. My chest ached at his words. I reassured him as best I could, telling him he would always have a safe place with me. But I knew his fear was real, and no words could erase the shadow of uncertainty from his mind. As the days shortened, I saw Anna's pride begin to bend. She worked longer hours at the store, her face pale and drawn when she came home. She called me late at night, her voice hoarse, asking if I would at least reconsider. I gave the same answer every time. The support is for your children, not for your lifestyle. If you want stability, you must create it. Greg resisted to the end. He spoke of loans, of bankruptcy, of lawyers who might intimidate me into reversing my decision. But none of his schemes solved the simple math. Their income could not cover the mortgage. Their expenses were larger than their earnings. The clock kept ticking, and no amount of bluffing slowed it. With 10 days left, Anna came again, this time without Greg. She looked smaller somehow, her voice softer. "Dad, what if we swallow our pride? What if we accept your terms?" I looked at her and said, "Then you may have a chance to save your children's stability. But only if both of you agree. You have 48 hours. After that, the offer is gone." She nodded, her eyes shining with fear and understanding. I knew the deadline was not just about money. It was about character. Pride and humility were wrestling inside that house, and the foreclosure notice was the referee. Either they would bend and change, or they would break completely. Each day I marked the calendar, each day the tension grew. When the final week arrived, the air itself felt heavy. Neighbors whispered about the notice posted on their door, about the missing BMW, about Anna at the grocery store. Greg's shoulders sagged when he walked to his car, his voice less booming, his eyes less sure. Anna carried herself with the weight of someone who had seen what loss looked like and was willing to fight against it. 3 days left. I sat in my study, the lamp casting shadows across the piles of receipts. The phone rang again, and I knew this call would decide everything. Their time was almost gone, and the choice was theirs alone. I picked up, steady, ready to hear if pride had finally given way to survival. The call came on a Saturday morning, 2 days before the bank's deadline. Anna's voice was shaky, carrying the weight of sleepless nights. "Dad, we can't do this on our own. The mortgage, the penalties, the utilities, everything is crashing down." I could hear Emma in the background asking if they were going to have to move. I told Anna to come with Greg that afternoon. We needed to speak face to face. When the Honda pulled into my driveway, it was not with the confidence of old. The car door opened slowly, and Greg stepped out in a wrinkled shirt, his shoulders slumped, his eyes shadowed from lack of rest. Anna followed, her face pale, clutching a folder of papers to her chest. They walked up the path like defendants approaching a courtroom. I opened the door before they could knock and invited them into the living room. We sat in silence for a long moment. The children were not with them, which told me they wanted to hide this meeting from young ears. Finally Greg spoke, his voice lower than I had ever heard it. "We can't cover it. We've tried every way. We're out of time." I nodded slowly. "I know. That is why I asked you here. You want my help, but my help comes with conditions. This is not a negotiation. This is an ultimatum." Anna clutched the papers tighter. "What conditions?" I looked directly at both of them. "I will pay for Tommy and Emma's school directly to the academy. I will cover their clothes, their medical needs, their activities, and I will establish college funds for both of them. But I will not pay your mortgage, your car loans, or any of your lifestyle expenses. From this moment on, you live within what you earn." Anna's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. Greg shifted in his chair, his jaw tight. "That's not enough," he muttered. "We'll lose the house." "Then you lose the house," I said firmly, "and you find one you can afford." Silence settled thickly. Anna finally whispered, Is that all? No, I said. There is more. I want public acknowledgement of the truth. I want the people you lied to in this community to know what I have done for the last 15 years. That means a letter to the local newspaper thanking me for my support, social media posts admitting to the help, and face-to-face apologies to the neighbors you misled. Greg's head snapped up. You want me to humiliate myself? I shook my head. I want you to tell the truth. He stood and began pacing the room, his hands clenched. That's impossible. People will see me as weak. They already see you as dishonest, I replied. Which is worse? Anna reached out and grabbed his hand, pulling him back down beside her. Dad, she said through her tears, how long do we have to decide? 48 hours, I answered. Monday at noon the offer expires. If you have not agreed by then, the foreclosure goes through, and you face the consequences alone. Greg's face flushed red, and for a moment I thought he would explode. Instead, he lowered his eyes and muttered, You're asking too much. I leaned forward, my voice steady. I have already given too much. Almost $1 million. 15 years of my life. My retirement. My dreams. What I am asking now is nothing compared to that. The room went quiet again. I could hear the ticking of the clock on the mantel, each second marking the approach of their decision. Anna began to cry openly, her shoulders shaking. Greg sat stiff and silent, his pride wrestling with the reality in front of him. Finally, Anna looked at me with eyes full of desperation. Dad, thank you for still caring about Tommy and Emma. I softened my voice. I never stopped caring, but love does not mean endless enabling. This is your last chance to change. When they left, I watched from the window as the Honda pulled slowly away. The weight of their decision hung heavy in the air. Pride or survival, lies or truth. They had 2 days to choose, and this time the choice would define the rest of their lives. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of morning where the air itself felt like it carried weight. I sat in my study with the lamp casting its circle of light across my desk. The clock ticked steadily, each sound reminding me that noon would bring an end to the waiting. I had prepared myself for both answers. If they came, I knew what I would require. If they did not, I was ready to let the foreclosure take its course. At 10:15, the sound of a car pulling into my driveway broke the stillness. I looked out the window and saw the Honda parked neatly, its tired engine cutting off with a small shudder. The doors opened slowly. Anna stepped out first, her hair pulled back, her face pale but set with determination. Greg followed, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. His posture slumped like a man who had fought battles all night and lost every one. The children climbed out behind them, dressed in their school clothes, their faces wide with confusion and worry. They walked up the path together, and for the first time in years they did not look like a family built on pride. They looked like a family carrying a burden too heavy for them. I opened the door before Anna could knock. Dad, she said quietly, we need to accept your offer, all of it. I stepped aside and they filed into the living room. Tommy and Emma settled on the couch, their eyes darting between the adults, sensing something important was happening. Anna sat in the same chair she had the week before, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Greg remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back, his head bowed slightly like a defendant awaiting judgment. Anna's voice trembled. The bank called this morning. Foreclosure finalizes at 3 p.m. if we don't pay. We don't have the money. Her words trailed off as her eyes filled with tears. Emma tugged on my sleeve. Grandpa, are we really going to lose our house? I put my hand gently on hers. Not if I can help it, sweetheart. Greg cleared his throat, his voice hoarse. Mark, I need to say some things. He walked over to the mantel and looked at the wedding photo of Linda and me, his back to us as he spoke. 15 years ago you offered to help us temporarily. I took that help and turned it into something permanent without ever admitting what it cost you. His voice cracked. I let people believe I was providing when it was really you. I let my children think their life came from my success. He turned then, his face lined with defeat. For that I am sorry. Anna wiped her cheeks and spoke softly. Dad, I owe you apologies too. I treated your generosity like inheritance, like something I deserved, not something you chose to give. I never realized how much until now. She reached over and took Emma's hand. I leaned forward, my voice steady. If I help you keep the house today, things must change. I will pay for Tommy and Emma's school, their medical needs, their clothes, their activities. I will create college funds for them. But I will not pay your mortgage, or your cars, or your insurance. You will live on what you earn, and nothing more. Greg nodded slowly, his pride cracking into something closer to humility. We understand. There is more, I said. I want public acknowledgement. A letter to the community newspaper thanking me for 15 years of support. Honest posts on your social accounts. Face-to-face apologies to the neighbors you misled. Anna's face tightened with fear. This week? Before Saturday? Yes, I said firmly. Greg's jaw clenched, but he nodded again. What else? Monthly family dinners here, I told them. Not to talk about money, but to remember that family means respect, not entitlement. I stood and walked to my desk, pulling out my checkbook. I will call the bank and arrange an emergency payment, but hear me clearly. This is the last mortgage payment I will ever make for you. After today, you sink or swim on your own. As I dialed the bank, the room fell silent. I gave the account numbers, the amount, the authorization. When the representative confirmed the payment, I wrote down the confirmation code in my notebook. I hung up and set the phone down. Emma leaned close to her mother and whispered, "Are we going to be okay now?" Anna pulled her close, her voice trembling but certain. "Yes, sweetheart, we are going to be just fine." I looked around the room at their faces, tired and worn, but finally honest. For the first time in years, I felt the balance shift. Not back to the way it had been, but forward to something better. It was not victory in the loud sense. It was the quiet victory of truth over pride. And as they left that afternoon, the Honda carrying them away, I sat in my chair and let out a long breath. The surrender had come, not just to me, but to reality itself. 3 months later, the season had shifted. Spring's early chill gave way to the warmth of summer, and with it came small changes that told me life was moving forward in ways I had once thought impossible. The foreclosure notice was gone, replaced by a monthly mortgage payment made from their own pockets. The BMW had been traded for the modest Honda that now sat faithfully in their driveway. The whispers in the neighborhood had quieted, some replaced by nods of respect, others by silence that no longer carried sharp judgment. On the 3rd Saturday of June, they arrived at my house for our first official family dinner under the new arrangement. Right at 2 o'clock, the Honda pulled into the driveway. This time there was no rush of anger, no air of confrontation. Anna stepped out in a simple blouse, her hair pulled back neatly, her face tired but carrying a new steadiness. Greg followed, not with the swagger of before, but with the posture of a man learning humility, his tie loosened, his eyes meeting mine without defiance. Tommy bounded up the walkway in his soccer uniform, grass stains on his knees, a medal hanging proudly around his neck. Emma skipped beside him, holding a folder of drawings she wanted to show me. "Grandpa, look what I won," Tommy shouted as he threw his arms around me. His medal swung into my chest, cool and solid, a symbol of effort that belonged entirely to him. Emma climbed into my lap as soon as we sat down, laying out her drawings across my coffee table, each one brighter than the last. For a few moments the shadows of the past lifted, and all I saw was the joy of my grandchildren. Anna placed a manila folder on the table between us. "Dad, here's this month's budget. We covered the mortgage, utilities, groceries, and car payment ourselves. We even started a small emergency fund." Her voice carried pride, but it was not the hollow pride I had seen before. It was the pride of someone who had earned each dollar through her own hours on her feet. Greg sat forward, his tone softer than I ever thought I would hear from him. "I wanted to ask your advice, Mark. There's a promotion opportunity coming up, regional director. More responsibility, more travel. I want to make sure Anna and I can balance the kids' schedules if I take it." He looked at me not as a man demanding support, but as a son-in-law asking for guidance. I listened, then pulled out my own folder, organized as always. Here's what I've covered this month, I said, sliding the papers across. Tommy's soccer league fees, Emma's piano lessons, both of their medical checkups scheduled for next month. College funds opened in their names. The children leaned in with wide eyes as I explained, and for the first time I saw genuine gratitude flicker across Anna's face. She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. Dad, I can't thank you enough for keeping the children steady while we figured out how to be adults. Her words carried the weight of truth, not performance. Greg nodded. We even finished the community service hours Judge Martinez assigned after our apology letters. Volunteering at the food bank opened our eyes. We met families truly struggling, people living without anything. We realized we were never poor, just careless. Emma tugged at my sleeve then. Grandpa, we made thank you cards. She handed me one decorated with glitter and crooked hearts that read, "Thank you for taking care of us, even when Mom and Dad forgot to say please." Tommy's card was simpler, written in uneven letters. "I love you, Grandpa. You're the best." I held those cards in my hands as though they were the most valuable documents I had ever received. Anna spoke quietly, her voice carrying a mixture of hope and uncertainty. We've been talking about eventually buying a smaller house. Not right away, but maybe in a couple of years once we've saved more. Something we can truly afford. Greg nodded beside her. We want to prove we can stand on our own, not because we don't appreciate your help with the kids, but because we finally respect what you've already given us. The room grew still as their words settled. For years I had dreamed of hearing them speak with honesty instead of excuses, with gratitude instead of entitlement. Now that moment had come, though it carried the shadows of all that had been lost along the way. As the sun set, I walked them to their car. Emma held my hand tightly, her metal glinting in the last light of day. "Grandpa, are you proud of us now?" Tommy asked, his eyes searching mine. I looked at them, at Anna and Greg standing beside the Honda, at the children who had weathered storms not of their making, and I said, "Yes, I am very proud of all of you." They drove away slowly, their taillights disappearing down the street. I stood at the gate watching until the sound of the engine faded. Inside, the house was quiet again, the photograph of Linda on the mantel catching the glow of the lamp. I whispered to her, "I think you'd be proud too. Not just of me for keeping my promise, but of them for finally learning what respect looks like." It was not a perfect ending. There were still shadows. Pride does not vanish overnight, and wounds do not close without scars. But in that moment I understood that revenge had never been the goal. Transformation had. And sometimes the deepest justice comes not from punishment, but from the hard road that leads a family back to gratitude. For 15 years I carried them in silence, nearly $1 million given away, all while being treated like a failure. In the end, I found my voice, I drew a line, and I watched pride collapse into humility. My grandchildren gained stability, my daughter learned dignity, and even my son-in-law began to understand respect. The revenge was not their suffering, but their change. That is the justice that mattered. What about you? Have you ever reached the point where love had to mean saying no? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.